Yes, I always improv it. This is probably the intro right now. Like, and the audience is
Wow,
just
here
like,
we
they're
are.
so relevant. That's so cool. Game read through with friend Lex Mandrake in the top right corner. Yeah, I'm trying to think of something funny with the word Derf, because it's already funny.
I know, it is already funny. It's just a fun word. And then the cover art really accentuates it. It's great. But let's get into it.
Instead of, because you have like football turf, and then there's AstroTurf. If they made a space version of this game, it could be AstroDurf. Hey everybody, Jordan here with a silent PH, and we're back with game reviews with Lex in the top right corner, talking about this very well named, and I'm not being facetious. Like, I think it's a hilarious, great name because I don't understand it. But this is an RPG called DURF. If you're just joining us, we are like, if this is the first time you've ever seen an episode like this, we like to review these very short RPGs as like a spotlight on just like cool mechanics and things that we like about them, and it's just kind of like what's unique and interesting about this. And so, Lex, first of all, who are you, and why should people hang out with you? Aside from that Hero Quest in the background there.
Yo, Hero Quest. Also the Dinosaurs Hero Quest, toys, Godzilla. It's great. Those are the reasons, really. Not for me as a person. That's not a good idea. But yeah, I am Lex Mandrake. You can find me on Twitter at Dank Dungeons, and I write games, and I also do some music stuff, and you can find all those things on there. I'm a bestseller on the DMs Guild. I've got stuff in print right now. I got an album, a couple albums you can check out. It's cool. I do RPG things.
Yeah, and you do a lot of indie stuff, which is kind of fitting for this channel as well. Mm-hmm. Lex has turned me on to a lot of non-D&D games throughout our friendship, which has been a lot of fun.
Yes, I'm the one who made you play DCC originally. And yeah, a lot of OSR stuff. And that's really another big thing about what we're trying to do here is highlight smaller creators.
Yeah.
And if you are a player or a dungeon master, to be like, oh, there's this whole world out there of very accessible games that you can check out and just see what you like, you know?
Yeah.
Just dip your toe in, see how it is.
And so today we're talking about DURF, an adventure game for brave adventurers.
If you're cowardly, you can't play. I'm sorry.
No cowards allowed. By is it Emil Bovin? Is that how you say it?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me launch into my spiel here because I was
do.
taking the helm on this episode. So this is DURF by Emil Bovin. Now, disclaimer: I have interacted with Emil online a few times, and they have been very nice to me. So that might color a little bit of this. Just keep that in mind. But this is a rules-light OSR system that came out in 2021 and is free to download over on Emil's itch.io page. Emil has done all of the writing and all of the art for this 12-page document. Now, as we get into it, the sections included in here are character creation, which gives us 3 stats that mimic the modifiers that you would have for a traditional D&D style ability score rather than the score itself. Also a somewhat novel take on hit points, which I'm going to get to a little later, simple leveling system, and some inventory stuff, which we're also going to get to later. This is classless, and that's kind of a sort of a free-form idea that you'll see throughout this. We have, after that, the rules of play, which outlines a very simple d20 plus stat mechanic where you're attempting to roll over 15 for things like saves and checks, and an opposed roll for you against an NPC like in combat or something. After that, we have some spells, which are the kind of standard D&D fare. There's also a fun miscast table, and this is a roll to cast system. Then we have equipment, which is, again, your standard fantasy fare, but there is the addition of gunpowder, so that's kind of fun. Then we have NPCs, which includes hirelings, the old school D&D reaction system, and rules on converting OSR monsters, and then a page of enemies for the game. And then finally, we have some magic items. So like I said, this is 12 pages, so everything here is very short. The rules are streamlined, and the monsters and items and magic items are all sort of more like a sampling of what you would see in the game rather than like exhaustive lists of these are all of the things that you're going to encounter.
And I want to point out I think it's on his website, or maybe it's like the first page where doesn't he say it's like highly hackable? Yeah. So he wrote like a DURF is meant to be hacked. And so when you say like the magic items and the monsters, I really feel like those are those example templates that you kind of put into a game that's bare bones like this, so that you're like, oh, I see what you like, the formula for making my own magic item or my own monster or converting another monster from another system. But yeah,
for sure. And this is okay. So it's, and it takes that very streamlined skeleton that is very reminiscent of D&D. So a lot of us who are familiar with D&D or D&D like systems understand that. And then like with many OSR games like this, it takes ideas from other games or genres of games and then inserts them or puts them over this skeleton. So I think with these kinds of projects, the thing that's really important to focus on is not the skeleton itself, but the rules that are being put over it, because those give us kind of the best idea of what the designer like is going for, what kind of mood they're going for in play, like how they want the game to play, and maybe it points us toward the genre a little bit, or just, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So I outlined the big highlighted rules things, which are 3 things that are in this system that you don't see in a lot of other OSR games. Or, well, in some, but we'll get to it. So the inventory system, the advantage system, and the hit point system, and sort of how they all tie together in really interesting ways. It's like it's slot-based, right? So you're getting like 10 plus stat. And you put specific stuff in there, like your +1 sword or your helmet or what have you. But it can also have these things called supplies, which is kind of a general item that has some really cool uses. And then you can also put stress in it, which is super interesting. We're going to get to that later. So that's like inventory, right? And then I'm going to skip ahead to the advantage system, which is buffs and breaks in how to play. Jordan, if you want to scroll down a bit.
I'm scrolling.
So these are really interesting because they are sort of positive and negative bonuses represented by D6s that are rolled with your D20, right? So you can create pools of them and then take the highest of those D6s from that pool that gets rolled and then add or subtract that. And they're basically situationally given, or you can push yourself to give yourself buff dice, right? So and when you push yourself, it adds stress to your inventory. So now you have the advantage system interacting with the way the inventory works, right? So it's like you can be like, oh, I really want to hit this monster, and I know that I don't have a huge bonus, or they have like a really good dodge or what have you. I'm going to push myself. So I'm going to add stress to my inventory and add D6s and try and get as many D6s in my pool as possible. Roll all of those, take the highest of them, and then add that to my D20 roll and then my stat bonus, and like hopefully get the best thing that I can get.
Is there a pool of those buffs or like a limit?
I don't know if there's a limit, outside of the fact that when you're doing it, you're adding stress.
Right.
And stress takes up inventory slots, so you only have so many of those. So that's like how you're managing that resource.
That's a really cool system, because you could get really lucky with just a D6, or you could like pad it. And I assume you have to probably, before you roll, say, I'm going to push this. Otherwise, you're just like, keep rolling D6s till you get the result you want. But
yeah. I assume you have to declare that ahead of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's really neat. And then we have also side note in terms of that stress stuff. When you cast spells, you're also adding stress to your inventory. So that's like how this game emulates spell slots, right?
Right.
And then the last thing, the last big rule highlight I want to talk about, scroll down a bit more, I think the next page, is the hit dice and like damage and stuff.
Yeah.
So this is super different than what I see in a lot of games and super interesting. So you have hit dice, which are d6s. They increase as you level. So you have roughly as many hit dice as you have levels. You can choose to take other things if you want, but that's basically how it is most of the time. And then you have armor, which works like damage absorption. So if you're familiar with 5e, it's like temporary hit points. And then you have wound points, which is something you accumulate as you get hit. So the way a combat encounter would go is someone's going to hit you with a sword. You roll opposed ability checks against them, probably strength. If you roll too low, then they hit you. Weapons do static damage in this, so it's just like the sword hits you, 3 damage. First, your armor absorbs that, assuming you have armor left, because like I said, it's like 10 hit points, so it runs out. And then any spillover damage becomes wound points on your character. And then after that attack is over, and you know how many wounds you have, then you roll a number of d6s equal to your hit die, so basically equal to your level, and you have to get over how many wounds you currently have. And if you don't, you die. So
I like
so it's
it.
yeah, so it's really interesting because it's super like risky in terms of combat, because you could be like 6th level, right? And you're like, oh, I'm going to roll 6d6 to deal with wounds. So I have gotten hit 2 or 3 times, my armor's gone, and now I have 6 wound points, or let's say 7 wound points. You could theoretically die rolling 6d6 when you have 7 wounds, right? It's just like super unlikely, but it could happen. So it's always like, you got to be careful. Are you going to take that risk?
So you can't really
right?
die in combat, is what it sounds like.
Well, you do, because it happens at the end of the turn.
Oh, the
right?
end of the turn.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like they hit you, you figure out how many wounds are going on you, and then after you resolve that, then you roll to see if you're still standing.
That's really cool.
Yeah. It sounds like I haven't played it, right? But it sounds super, super interesting and really tense at the table, which I think is
kind
great.
of like death saving throws, but you're still in the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would like, because we get to a point with D&D 5e, not to complain, where like my monster has like 700 hit points, and I get tired. Like, this is more interesting to me, where it's, I don't know, they have their hit points are the armor. So if I could like steal a shield or steal a helmet, it's like, okay, yeah, now you've taken off so many hit points. Or you could just, do damage to them, kind of a thing, and wear them down. But then that wounds kind of opens up a whole new mechanic of spells, like spells that directly create wounds, bypassing armor. There's a lot of tinkering there that I think is really cool.
For sure. And to bring it back to the inventory management thing. So remember how I mentioned supplies, which are general items? When you're resting, so like between battles, but I guess also like when you do your long rest, so long rest, short rest kind of deal with 5e comparison, you can then spend supplies to repair items like armor. So if you're the warrior type and you have this heavy armor and you just get it annihilated in a battle, you can then like during your downtime use a bunch of supplies and build it back up, and then hopefully get healed a little bit too, and now you're like, cool, I'm back in the fight after the short rest or what have you. So you get more sort of bounce back if you manage your inventory well, which is super interesting. But yeah, those are the main like different kinds of rules that you don't see in a typical OSR game that I wanted to highlight. But that's that. So now that like we've looked over it a little bit, we've talked about the big things about it. What are your general thoughts on it?
I mean, I really like that there's 3 stats, because it really and then you're focusing just on those 3 things. I am curious about the 15 static for saving throws.
Yeah.
And so that feels like a roll under mechanic in a earlier kind of RPG, where it's like, in order to succeed, you have to roll under your strength or something. And so this one, it's like, well, in order to succeed, you have to roll over 15. But that number doesn't seem to change with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it doesn't scale,
yeah.
Right? And I think that's one way in which you could easily hack this to learn from other, like more like a 5e or I mean a 3E and up game, right? Where you're like, okay, I'm going to set this DC, and it's either going to be 10 if it's really easy, and it's going to be 15 if it's kind of medium, and it's going to be 20 if it's really hard. And yeah, I think like that's an easy thing to do, to just insert into this, that I think will add a little more variety or a little more scaling, especially if you're going to do higher level play in it.
I really like this inventory system. Like I'm just looking now at like worn weapons, where if you roll a one, your weapon does one less damage until it's repaired, and so there's a whole like repairing kind of thing that's about this and stuff. So,
and the supplies things, you can use them to repair, but they're like a general item. So you can either say, oh, I have X supplies and I'm going to use them to repair this thing. Or you can be like, I'm going to use one of my supplies and say that was a 10-foot pole or a 50 feet of rope or something when you're in the dungeon. So you can kind of like you can spend them to pull out something that might be useful in the moment.
Oh, that's really cool. What sticks out to you other than those things?
Other than those things, visually, the art, right?
Yeah.
The art is super charming. It's like kind of fun. It's kind of cartoony.
And the 12 pages. I should point that out too. Like this layout's really good, and he has like concise information in very specific spots, and I like that.
Yes. I'm gonna point out that the wizard in the spellcasting section is just a dude with an eyeball for a head.
Oh yeah.
And he breaks the rule of spellcasting, which says you have to be able to speak, and he doesn't have a mouth. How's he gonna do that? But
you're right.
But yeah, really fun.
Maybe it was a spell that went wrong, and now he's no longer a wizard because he can't. That actually,
I did. So there's the miscast table, and that might actually be on there. I didn't look.
Starts raiding sardines. That's fun.
Ooh, yes, no, okay. So there's a lot of silliness in there, but there's a lot of little specifics that point toward a genre of fantasy, even though like none of it's fleshed out or specific, right? Or like overt. So like the inclusion of gunpowder that I mentioned earlier, or like the monsters page only has, I don't know, 6 or 7 monsters, and half of them are like your standard D&D monsters like dragon and shadow, but then one of them's like echo gecko.
Yeah.
and another one is, I forget the name of it.
Flesh Orb of Zold.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a beholder, but then the Eelfolk, great. They have duels. But the Flesh Orb one is interesting because it's like kind of like a beholder, but it explicitly says it's like a piece of AI technology that has flesh around it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sci-fi monster. And those are all great. They like jump off the page and they point toward like a very specific kind of game that like if you watch our video on World of Dungeons, right, I made this point there a lot, where you have this game that's hinting at stuff, and then if you're a game master who wants to flesh it out, you can kind of use those to lead you in a direction of creating a setting that's like that, or you can dial that back if you want and just create your own setting and ignore those things, but it's kind of up to you which direction you want to go with it. Yeah, and I think that's a very cool thing about the book.
And something I think that needs to come back in D&D is hirelings, or just like something that 5e doesn't do well. Well, maybe they do now with the sidekicks or something. I haven't really explored that option, but reading a lot of OSR, I really like hirelings. I just finished reading a book that had a whole subsection of hireling rules for Old School Essentials, and I like that this has hirelings as well. So.
Yeah, and they're especially useful in OSR games and this game, because this game, as we talked about, is so much about inventory management. So having a guy who can carry stuff for you is a really big deal.
It is worth that gold price per day to have him follow you around, because you know that you'll have extra spell slots or something like that, or extra stress that you can push yourself. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's you should check out Derf. It looks really fun. And I would say like grab this game if you want to tinker around and like add rules, and you think you could like flesh out the system more to make it more in one direction or another, or grab it and play it if you just want a really streamlined version of D&D that, despite its very simple rules, has the ability to create a lot of tension at the table. And yeah, that's my main pitch.
A lot of times, I like it a lot. A lot of times we do these reviews, and I think, oh, I want to take that mechanic and put it in a different game, like a game I'm more familiar with. This is one that I would like to run it as is, because I think it's unique enough that it would bring a lot to it would do a lot to just kind of play around with it. Like, I think it's kind of neat. So very fun. Yeah. So this is, like we said, free. You should definitely go check it out.
Just go check it out. Why not?
Because it's 100% free. DURF by... Oh, what does DURF mean? Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, I didn't look at... So I guess somewhere, Emil, I remember seeing on Twitter, like, Emil tweeted something about how because he's from Norway, I think, and in the native language it means something. It's like slang for something, like adventurer or ruffian or something like that.
Okay.
I think, but I couldn't find the tweet where he talks about it, so don't quote me on that.
Okay.
But it was something like that.
It looks like on his website he's got a random character generator now.
There are a few adventures
on Itch, I should say. So
yeah, I think he did a couple of adventures for it, so you don't have to, like, if you do want to try out the system, you don't have to, like, do all of that legwork up front to get it, like, ready to run. You can see an example adventure from the creator to kind of get an idea of how maybe it's supposed to play, right?
There's a looks like a hexcrawl version called Zerf or something.
Nice.
There's
good.
faction rules for DURF called Turf. Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Amazing. There's a lot of little micro supplements for it, so yeah, this would be a lot of fun. I would definitely play this game. I think it's cool. So that's DURF. It's free. If you want, links down below, but of course, it's a name your own price. And I'm sure if you value it as much as we do, you'd be fine donating $1 or more. So try, keep indie content creators going by, feeding them here and there. So awesome.
All right.
We'll see you next time on when we write DURF the musical.
Yes.